I'm Christy Hemingway, host of Ed Curation, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, have I got something cool for you to check out? Behind the Mic, Voices of the EPN, an inspiring and engaging podcast brought to you by the Education Podcast Network and hosted by EPN's founder, Christopher J. Nessie. Oh, so much cool stuff to learn. You're going to love this. Go check it out now. Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Elizabeth B. Splaine. That's right, she's back. The last time we talked was about her novel Swan Song, and this time we're talking about her latest, Steel Butterflies. Two women, one a teenager, one a 97-year-old, who has many skeletons in that proverbial closet left over from World War II. Both have secrets. The story deals with issues of the past and of the present. Awesome read. Will leave you thinking. Oh, you're going to love this interview. You're going to love this book. Thanks for listening. And then, by the way, before you go, it would be so cool if you went to my website, stephenmiletto.com/reviews, and left a review. Could you do that for me? Say some nice words and maybe give me a 5-star review? What do you think about that? That would be so cool. You are awesome. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. Enjoy the show.
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Miletto. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. Teaching, learning, leading, K-12. With Dr. Steve Miletto.
Elizabeth B. Splaine wrote the Dr. Julian Stryker series of blind thrillers, Blind Order and Blind Knowledge, as well as Devil's Grace, the winner of the Win Words Count writing competition. Additionally, she wrote Swan Song, an historical fiction novel which was chosen by IndependentBookReview.com as a top 35 impressive indie press book of 2021. Prior to writing, Elizabeth earned an A.B. in psychology from Duke University and an MHA from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She spent 11 years working in healthcare before switching careers to become a professional opera singer and voice teacher. When not writing, Elizabeth teaches classical voice in Rhode Island, where she lives with her family. Today, our focus is on her latest novel, Steel Butterflies. Here's a little bit about Steel Butterflies, and it's based on true events. Ebony Dobbs has problems: unruly hair, not fitting in with the popular kids, figuring out how to pay for college, and a secret she's buried so deeply, even though she doesn't know the truth. A kick-butt best friend, Connor Leibowitz, uses his computer genius to dig into a new secret. Ebony reluctantly accompanies her mother on a home health visit, meeting Madame Celeste DeWitt, a 97-year-old with a closet full of skeletons from World War II. As Ebony learns the truth about Madame's wartime exploits, she comes to terms with her own past, realizing she and Madame share more than they differ. When Connor uncovers information that implicates Madame's estate manager in a plot to steal the old woman's fortune, the teenagers launch a campaign to protect her, even as Madame's past barrels into the present, threatening to destroy everything in its path. Inspired by real people and places, Steel Butterflies will have you marveling at the beautiful simplicity of true friendship, as well as the courage of women who come face to face with determining their future. Beth, the last time we talked was on episode 461, back in the spring of 2022, when we discussed your book, Swan Song. Welcome back, and say hi to everyone.
Thank you for having me back. I'm thrilled to be here. Hi, everybody, and thanks for listening.
Well, glad to have you back. And before we talk about your latest novel, Steel Butterflies, could you talk a little bit about you and singing?
Sure. I've sung my whole life. I knew I wanted to be a singer when I was 5 years old, and I started studying voice at 12 at the Wilmington Music School in Wilmington, Delaware. And then I studied through college, and then I took 10 years off when I was working in healthcare, and I didn't sing a note. And I was very sad. So when I was 31, I recorded a CD. We lived outside of Boston. I didn't know what to do to get back into singing, so I recorded a CD, and then I ended up studying voice at the New England Conservatory's extension program. Through there, I started auditioning 2 days before we moved from Boston to Hershey, Pennsylvania. I auditioned for Boston Lyric Opera. They were doing Carmen. It was my first real audition, and this has never happened before since. Well, that was my first audition, but they asked me after my audition, if I was going to be around for the performance, which was so bizarre because no one's ever asked that. So of course I told the truth and I said no. And they said, would you travel back, to do this if we hired you? And I had 2 young kids. I couldn't do it. So we moved to Hershey, Pennsylvania. No one would hear me sing because I didn't have a resume. And so I put on a recital. I invited local and regional opera companies, and I don't know why, but they came. And that got me singing with local opera companies. And I started getting major roles in very small companies. Then we moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan. I sang with Grand Rapids Opera, which was a nice regional company. And then we moved outside of Detroit. And my last audition was with Detroit Opera. So I sang for 15 years and worked up from nothing. I didn't have a music degree. I didn't major in music. But I did study music. And after being on stage for 15 years, I decided I didn't want to be on stage anymore. My last contracted performance was with a small kids opera company where I played the witch in Hansel and Gretel, which was on my bucket list of roles to play because it's such a great role. And that was my last official performance. Now I perform when I want to perform. And I have a presentation that I do where I sing a song related to my books, and then I talk about the book, and then I'll launch into another song. So I'm slowly bringing the 2 worlds together, not only in writing, but also in promoting my writing. So it's kind of cool, actually. But I enjoyed it very much when I was there. But then one day I just didn't want to be there anymore. And I was teaching from the time we lived in Hershey. It literally fell in my lap. I had no business teaching. I was a terrible pianist and I didn't know what I was doing, but people kept coming. So I ended up teaching, and here I am 20 years later, and I work at the Rhode Island Philharmonic. Of course, I've become a much, much better teacher. And ironically, if I were performing now, I'm so much a better singer from having taught for so many years. So that's the story of singing. Loved it. Glad I'm not doing it anymore. When my students say, you want to do something with me? I said, oh, I love you so much. No, it's your time. I'm done. So
Nice.
It's all good.
Nice. I appreciate you sharing that, because it also, you make sure that music appears in your novels, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do. In every novel, there's something musical. Really, it's because to me, music isn't something you listen to or something you play or something you sing. It comes out of who you are. We sing when we're happy, or we're happy because we sing, right? It releases endorphins. Like, music is integral to life. And even if you don't consider yourself musical, there's almost no one on the planet who doesn't at least listen to music a little bit. And what happens to your body when you listen to music? It changes. So in a good way, or if you're sad or whatever. So to me, music it's just critical. And so therefore it makes its way into all of my books.
That is awesome. I love that. I appreciate you explaining about your past and the current, that role that music plays. So good stuff. So when you guys start reading her books, you're going to get a look. You'll see it. It's right. It's gonna have a presence.
Glaringly obvious, yeah.
Yes. So Beth, at the conclusion of your book, Steel Butterflies, you have a last section called Letter to the Reader. In this section, you note, choice is a theme in all of my books. It's a simple word chock full of consequences. Could you talk about what you mean?
We live in a time where it seems like a lot of people do not want to take responsibility for choices that they have made. It's always someone else's fault. As kids grow up and they blame their parents for events that happened in their lives, there's some truth to that. But at some point, we become the stewards of our own life, and we have to make choices. And those choices need to be lived with, the consequences that fall from them. So this can be good and bad. Like, some people say, oh, I had no choice but to help that homeless man because otherwise he would have frozen. Well, that was a choice you made. It was a very kind choice. It was a very empathetic choice. So it fascinates me, the psychology behind how some people really believe there's no choice when there is. Again, both good and bad. A friend of mine just told me the other day, in her opinion, there aren't good and bad choices. There are just choices and the repercussions that fall from them. And so some people believe that the choices we make are partially determined by what we're supposed to learn in this lifetime. And so if you make the choice and you're not willing to learn from the consequences, then are you really fulfilling your goal? So choices can seem very black and white, but in wartime, any time of trauma or stress, I think it kind of becomes a spectrum of decision making. For example, in Swan Song, or in any of my books, actually, when is murder, the choice of murder, when is that okay? Or is it never okay? So without giving anything away, if your life is at stake and you end up murdering someone in the process, was that okay? And I don't think there's one right answer. I think it depends on your own morality, your own background, life experience. And it's not necessarily right or wrong that I look at. It's rather the reality of the choices we have to make, sometimes under stressful situations, and how we live with those consequences, what we do with that. So Crime and Punishment is that's one of my favorite books, because Dostoevsky describes a choice that's made and how it drives him insane, the guilt. So if he were a different person, would the result have been the same? And of course, the answer is probably no. So I just find it fascinating. It's fascinating to me.
Oh, that's awesome, and it's powerful. I mean, what you're talking about, and the idea of good and bad, and we'll get into another question about this in a little bit. But it's something that the choices that we make, and can it ever be that we did we see it as a choice? Were we forced to do? There's just different levels that play at it, and I just thought this was very powerful as I was reading that, and so appreciate you talking about it, because it plays out in your with your characters. There was a real Celeste. Could you talk about having your friend talk about the past? I mean, why is this important when understanding the past, and what's it do to those the idea of sharing those stories and thoughts? I mean, what did that do for you?
Well, let me back up and say I met the real Celeste 30-something years ago. Her husband was a patient of my father-in-law, who was a surgeon. And after her husband passed, through no fault of my father-in-law, I might add, she became kind of part of the family. And she was at Easters and Thanksgivings, and she was just part of the family all the time. She would, as she aged, she would talk about, if she had a glass of wine, she would let something slip about the war. Like when she met Rommel when she was in Paris, and she would just say stuff like that, and everything would stop, and we'd say, "What? You met what? When? What?" Or talking about when her family went underground after the Nazis moved into their home. Again, everything would stop. So, we often don't realize we are literally living in the middle of history, but when you're in the middle of it, it's just life. It's not history, right? You realize this is probably important, but you don't really appreciate it until after it's done, because choices have not yet been made, or they have been, but the repercussions, the bricks have not fallen yet. So it's so easy for us to sit here and look back on anyone's experience and say, well, I would have done this and I would have done that. But you don't know. You may think you know what you're going to do in a situation, but until you're in the situation, in my opinion, you don't really know. So every time the real Celeste would talk about that, it was history. She was living history, sitting in the living room, talking about the war. It was alive to her. In fact, she initially gave me 6 or 7 years ago, she gave me permission to write her story. And we lived in Michigan at the time. And so I was doing phone interviews with her, and she was 92 at the time. And her accent was like this. It was still very, very thick. It was very difficult to understand her over the phone. Wow. And also because she was 92. Yes. So after 2.5 interviews, and I had oodles of notes, she said, "I can't do this anymore." And I said, "Why?" And she said, because there is someone who lives near me who, if he found out who I was from the war, would kill me.
Wow.
She was 92. The war was still alive to this woman. And for anyone who's been through any traumatic event, if you relive it, I don't know, in my case, I end up shivering. Don't even, it comes completely unbidden. And it happened yesterday. And so to her, it was happening yesterday. And that's all in the book. So to sit and chat with her, you were there. She put you there. And I couldn't help but think, what would I have done? What would I have done if I saw someone being beaten in the streets? What would I do if I had extra food, but it was a crime to give it to someone who shouldn't have it? What would I do? And it's kind of a torture. I mean, it's really it's much easier to just go on with your life and say, la, 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 whatever, that's someone else's problem. That isn't happening to me. But I've always been the kind of person, even on stage, I would constantly think, well, if this goes wrong, then I'll handle it this way. And sometimes that was to my benefit because things always go wrong on stage. So it's kind of the same thing. I think every time I come across a situation like that she would talk about, I would think, what would I do? So talking with her brought history to life. As she got older, she talked about it more. I think it was therapeutic for her. I think she was letting go of some baggage she had carried for a very, very long time. And so I like to think that it benefited her. She never said that. And there was a very fine line where we didn't push too much. It was her choice, of course, to discuss it or not. So she was a joy to know, a relic of an amazing past who didn't think she had made great choices and didn't think she had done that much in her life, even though she had worked for the resistance while Nazis were living in her home. She ended up with 3 PhDs, spoke 5 languages. I mean, this woman was incredible. And as she gave me permission to publish this book, finally, I read her part of the book when I went to visit her, and she was bedridden and she never opened her eyes the entire 2 hours I was there, but I read her a portion of it. And she lay in bed. I was reading her a part where Celeste and Ebony, the 2 main characters, are in the butterfly house. And as I was reading, her hands were fluttering up and down like butterflies. And she kept saying, "Oh, it's so beautiful, Beth. It's so beautiful." And so when I was done, I said, "Do I have your permission to put this out in the world?" And she said, "You do." And my shoulders dropped like 3 inches. My mother-in-law was there. And I asked her if I could use her name, and she said she'd think about it. And then I asked her if she wanted to say anything in the beginning of the book anonymously. And she said, "Yes, love is eternal." And so "Love is Eternal" is in the front of the book. She never got over the loss of her husband, who adored her. And he still hung out in the house, if you know what I'm saying. He still was around in the house. I saw him once. That's a whole nother story. We'll do another time. But he was definitely there. So
that's cool. Thanks so much for sharing. And it's one of those things that I can only imagine. If someone's sharing with you about their experiences, and there's going to be things that they talk about, just like just everything that you're mentioning, because at some point they have to decide whether they're going to continue talking with you or not.
Right.
And also the possibility of whether you're really listening to them or not, and has to come into play as well. And I think too often people, they go to visit somebody and they talk with them and are not so sure they're talking with them or interchanging or listening to what they're talking about. So thank you so much for sharing about Celeste.
Yeah.
It's cool that you had that connection that you were able to make. So let's talk about a couple of characters that you've mentioned now. So in your book, who is Ebony and who is Celeste?
Ebony is a 15-year-old biracial girl. Her father is white and her mother is African American, and she lives in a very white town in Rhode Island, a town that puts up signs that says, "Hate has no home here." And of course, hate has a home everywhere, unfortunately. And Ebony is the target of some of that hate. And she's trying to navigate her way through being a biracial girl in a very white town, and just being a teenager. She's incredibly bright. She meets Celeste DeWitt, the 97-year-old old woman, because her mother, who I love so much, Ebony's mother, Jean, is a home health nurse. And so Jean picks up Ebony from school and says, I have to go see a client that was just added to my schedule. Ebony hates visiting old people. They smell, it's gross. They always have like ulcers and things like that. And so she goes with her mother, and Madame DeWitt is rude, very rude to Ebony the first time she meets her. But Ebony sees pictures in the hallway of a younger Madame DeWitt. And in one of the pictures, Madame DeWitt is wearing something on her lapel that looks like a pin. And she's looking past the camera, and it's the only close-up, it's the only headshot in the entire group of photographs. And she becomes obsessed with this picture, and she wants to know more from this woman. So despite the fact they don't care for each other very much in the beginning, she ends up coming back to visit Madame DeWitt, who sees something in Ebony, a lot of herself. She says to Ebony at one point, you're incredibly bright, but I see a sadness in your eyes. You've suffered loss. And I think that unspoken connection is what joins them. And that's what gets them kind of past their initial dislike of each other. Sometimes, I don't know if this has happened to you, but sometimes I meet someone and I'm not sure about them, but I do feel drawn to keep talking to them, almost like somebody knows more than I'm allowed to know at the time. And so that's what happens with those two characters. But Ebony is she's a powerhouse, and she's trying to figure out who she is and what she stands for. And working with Madame DeWitt and chatting with her, she finally comes to understand what her resistance is. Madame had the resistance. What does Ebony have? So she figures it out. And through their meetings, significant secrets are revealed that Ebony didn't even know about herself. And Madame is very careful about what she divulges. But the kids, as you mentioned in the beginning, do a little sleuthing, a la Nancy Drew, sort of, and figure out some important stuff that may threaten Madame.
That is awesome. Appreciate you sharing. And it's leading into, I'm on purpose not going to get into too much detail, because if you do, it gives away things that are going to happen. But appreciate you talking about this. It's something that I got to make sure I bring out is that World War II is part of the setting for your story. And could you talk about what you're doing, either research or background information that you uncovered or used to help connect your story to the time frame?
Yeah, because I had just come off the heels of writing Swan Song, where I read a bajillion books for that one, I felt I had a good grasp of a useful grasp, I shouldn't say, because you can never know enough about something you're interested in, but I had a good grasp of Paris in World War II. There's a book by Anne Saba called Les Parisiennes, and it's specifically about women before, during, and after World War II. And so that was hugely helpful. That had a major impact on how I wrote the story. It helped me get inside the real Celeste's head even more. And because remember, when I wrote this book, she had not given me permission to write it. The book was originally supposed to be about the real Celeste, but it ended up being about Ebony, because I was almost writing defensively.
Gotcha.
I wanted to write about Celeste, but I knew I wasn't supposed to. So when I wrote this, I didn't even think this could be published until she passed away, if ever. So it was a year plus of my life. I was like, wow, am I ever going to get this back? Or is this ever going to go anywhere? But that was one of the books. Les Parisiennes by Anne Saba is one of the books I read to really get inside the head of a woman in Paris during World War II. That was probably the most influential book. But of course, I had read books about Hitler and about, concentration camps and about the war in general for the previous book, Swan Song, that all came into play here.
Gotcha. Cool. I kind of figured that really helped, because you got such detail for that story as well.
Yeah.
So, something that I like about the way you write is that you use descriptions that make the reader get the picture that you're creating. I mean, for example, early in your book, Ebony says the following: "Creepy," Ebony finished, rubbing her eyes and gawking at their surroundings. Straight ahead, heavy tree branches hung low, threatening to scratch the top of the car as it passed. Bushes leaned into their path to actively impede progress. Ebony shook her head, as in, don't go into the haunted mansion kind of creepy? Like the call is coming from inside the house kind of creepy? Nice. I mean, could you talk about helping to get the reader to be where you want them to be? Because I got to tell you, if you ever walk down or driven down a path and there's maybe a little storm or wind coming and maybe it's getting a little dark, or it is dark already, and the trees are swaying and you're kind of bumping against your car. So, you can always, if you watch one too many movies, I like the reference here, by the way, about the call coming from inside the house or the haunted mansion. It's like, I get the feel here, right? It's like, cool. I mean, talk a little bit about that. I mean, could you talk about, helping them get the reader to where you want them to be?
Yeah.
Their thoughts.
Well, I only know the way I write. And first of all, the real Celeste did live in a crumbling pink mansion, not blue mansion. And it is on the Atlantic in a different town than what's in the book. But so when I would pull into her driveway, that description was very true.
Nice.
But aside from that, I love similes and metaphors, and I love writing as a teenager, because I think sometimes I think as a teenager, which probably is not so good. But this wasn't supposed to be a YA book. This is just what I think a teenager would say. And I had several teenagers read it to see if some of this stuff was spot on. But it means something. And, there's always a little drama with not always, there's often a little drama with teenagers. So you can just see Ebony saying creepy, like, don't go in the house, kind of creepy, like the call is coming from inside that. Yeah, it's creepy, Mom. It's just that whole attitude thing. I just love that. And nice. Because I think I come from, the stage, to me, all of my settings are on stage or Excellent. On a movie set in my head. So the car was very, the crappy old blue Toyota or whatever is super clear. And so I see it. I see it when I write it, and that's how I write it. But I do love similes and metaphors and connect, just making sure that if I can't see it, then the reader isn't going to be able to see it. And there are often times when I'm describing something and I think, no, I've already said that, because it's really easy, especially this is my 5th book. It's easy to get into a groove, and go back to something you said before. And I was like, nope, can't do it, Gotcha. But I have to be able to see it. And my gut knows when it's a decent description and when it's not. And then, editors come back and say too much description, too little description. I tend to just want to get everything on the page, and then I go back in my rewrite and I add a lot more description. But that scene, when they first pull up to the house, just poured out of me because I could see it, Nice. I could see it even down to the algae on the cherub in the fountain. Excellent. So it's everything. No one wants to go into the house, and it's certainly a house that a teenager would not want to go into, especially one who knows she's going to see an old person who smells in her mind.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, it definitely created that picture. I mean, I'm going to read another one here where you can tell. I mean, it's just something that you do so well, and I love it. Later in Steel Butterflies, you say this, or your characters say this. What happened next? Ebony asked. Madame tapped a finger on her mouth, as if she were trying to remember, or perhaps forget. The following day, my friend and I sat on a park bench and shared a warm cup of tea while we waited for Heinrich. He never appeared. Okay, so this is cool because you're creating anticipation for something to happen, which is, I love it when a writer makes you want to keep reading because you want to know, okay, so what happened next?
Yeah. Why did Heinrich not appear?
Yeah, exactly. And just as a note, if you've ever talked with somebody who is older and they're telling you something and then suddenly they pause and you wonder, did they just on purpose leave something out?
Absolutely. Yep.
Oh my gosh, I felt this right here. And, could you just talk about writing to keep the reader interested in reading more? I mean, this is cool.
Yeah, it's easy. In my opinion, it's easy and it's hard because I know what I like to read as a reader. Early on in my writing, every chapter had to end with, if not a cliffhanger, something to hopefully get the reader to keep reading. As my stories got more complex, I think I didn't focus on that as much because the drama of the war was often enough to get people to keep reading in both books. But in that case, Madam is telling her, and I don't want to give it away, but Madam is describing basically her first escapade as a spy. And she was, I think, 17 or 18 in the book when this happened. And when you understand how old she was and what she had to do to survive, it's appalling. And so when you read that, you do wonder what happened to Heinrich, and you very quickly learn what happened to Heinrich. But again, that was real. So I basically was just telling a story that in and of itself was so dramatic that I just had to make sure the verbiage worked. You know what I'm saying? There are times when you as a writer have to create the drama. And in this case, the drama was there. I just had to sculpt it. I had to describe it. And so, whenever I am working with students and they're singing a song, sometimes I'll say to them, sing it as if you're singing to kids. Because if you tell stories to kids, you don't say, once upon a time, there were 3 little bears, right? You go, once upon a time, there were 3 little bears and they lived in the woods. And so that same kind of drama has to come into writing, right? And so she taps her lips and then she said, he never appeared. And then there's the dramatic pause because Madam is, of course, even though she is telling her own stories, she is very aware. She has been an actor her whole life. That's what spies are, right? They're the ultimate actors. She knows how to create a scene. She knows. Now, I'm not suggesting that she did that on purpose. Maybe she did. I don't know. I know that the real Celeste would drop a bomb, verbal, like met Rommel. And
nice.
I do believe that she knew exactly what she was doing because everything would stop and we would all pay attention to her. And it's not that she was attention hungry because she wasn't, but she also didn't mind it.
Right.
So I think there's a little of all of that going on.
Well, I got to tell you do a good job of wanting us to
thank you,
to know more and okay, let's find what's going to happen now. So cool. So
thank you.
That is awesome. All right, without revealing any major plot points, could you talk a little bit about the role that secrets play in your story?
Oh yeah. So, secrets can often be cancerous, right? Because secrets are the nugget, and then the nugget gets encapsulated in time and guilt and pressure to reveal or not reveal. And so at some point, many people feel the need to reveal long-held secrets. I mean, everybody has some secret, right? But if this secret is so big, like you killed someone, and you're not sure how you feel about it, putting it out there so you're giving the other people the opportunity to judge is very, very scary. But holding it in damages you. Even if you stuff it down so deeply so that you don't even remember that you did it, it's still going to come out one way or another. It just will. So secrets to me are very, in general, damaging. But if you reveal them too early, that also can be damaging. Maybe less to you and more to the people around you. So where is that fine line and how do you discover it and what do you do with it? That gets to choice and the repercussions coming from choice, right? So these 2 women, young woman and old woman, each have secrets. Ebony doesn't know her secret because she's buried it so deeply. Madam knows her secrets, but she has chosen to not reveal them. And I want the reader to decide why she chooses not to reveal them. Again, and this is discussed in the book, anyone who's been through trauma doesn't necessarily want to talk about it. I mean, many, as you know, many people from World War II literally wouldn't talk about the war because who knows, the memories were too painful. But I've had World War II survivors approach me about Swan Song and Steel Butterflies. One specifically about Swan Song, one said, it's too early to be writing books like this. It's too early. It's what, 80 years ago or whatever now?
Right.
It is so, and we listened to that too early. But of course, to him, it was yesterday.
Right.
His friend read the book and said, unbelievable. This is spot on. It was amazing, da, da, da. So it's all about each person's perspective. But ultimately, it's up to you if you want to reveal a secret or not. But you need to live with the choice of choosing to reveal or not choosing to reveal.
It's something else, and it's something that I think anyone who's reading is going to, if they've got secrets, it's going to kind of hit home. I guess that's where I'll go with that. So, all right. So, one of the things that I want to make sure that I get you to talk about, I mentioned in the very beginning, is let's talk about the concepts of good and bad people. What are your thoughts about this? I mean, what do you hope the reader thinks about when she finishes your story in terms of good and bad?
Ebony kind of says to her best friend, Connor, who I love, at one point, she's like, or Connor, one of them says, God, adults are so screwed up. I never want to grow up. They're just so screwed up. Adulting is hard,
Yes.
Because of course, as you get older, the choices have larger consequences. And so I've been thinking about this recently, actually. You read about someone, I read The Life and Death of Adolf Hitler, which I could only read 30 to 50 pages at a time because it was just so, it makes you want to vomit. But, are evil people born? And this is something that my undergrad degree is in psychology. I mean, this has fascinated me forever. Good people do bad things. What does good people mean, right? What does that even mean? Because do your actions define who you are? Do your thoughts define who you are? So, and who's the judge? Yep. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is what I tell my kids. If you can't look in the mirror at the end of the day and said, I did good today, I did the best I could do. And if you're not honest with yourself to be able to say, well, I could have done that better. I need to work harder there. We don't want to bash ourselves, but we need to keep striving for better all the time. So in the book, the estate manager in the beginning seems like a terrible person. And over the course of the book, again, without giving too much away, Ebony and Connor think they've nailed him. They find out all this stuff about him, but then they learn why he did what he did. And all of a sudden, the truth is gray. It's not clear anymore. Right and wrong has blurred, just like in the war. Right and wrong blurs. So that's one example. Another example is a friend of mine, a great writer, whose book is going to be coming out soon, called For the Love of Jeremy. She and I were in a competition together, the When Words Count competition, and we took a walk. And she said she came over from Germany when she was 2. And I said, I didn't know you were born in Germany. She said, yeah, my dad wanted us to get out of there. And I said, oh, that must have been because that was during the war, right? And she said, yeah, he was a soldier. And I stopped and I said, your father was a Nazi? And as soon as I said it, I was like, hi, Judgy McJudgerson. What? No, back up the train. Right. And then she said, yes, but he was a good Nazi or something like that. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, he saved as many people as he could. I have since learned that he was stationed at the Russian border, and the Russians would come and shoot the German Nazis, because even then there was the Russian-German, standoff. They would shoot them. So the the Nazis would hide in this woman's house. She protected them. And the Russian soldiers would rape her and beat her to try to get her to tell the truth, and she never did. She protected those soldiers. Okay, first of all, like, it's speechless when I heard that. Second of all, my friend's father did what he could do to save him and his family. If I were presented with the choice of joining the Nazi Party or being killed, what would I do? Right? It's a terrible, awful choice. As soon as the war was over, he took his family and he moved to the United States because he knew that it would never be the same again. And he wanted to get as far away as he could. Is he a good person or a bad person? I don't think, well, I know he's a good person because my friend is a good person and because I've read her book. But the point is, I don't think it's as clear as people want to make it out to be. I really don't. I think it's doing the best you can at the time and living with the consequences of choices you make.
That is so powerful because it is something that, I think people have argued over. People have written dissertations on, people have written theses on, and, it's just because because we're all going to have our opinions about it based upon our experiences, I think, and that is going to play a huge role. And, for events like World War II and such, there's things that took place that for some it would require a lot of forgiveness to be able to say anything about good and bad that's not just bad is bad.
Yeah. And if I lived it, I may not feel this way. I might say, nope, I know what's bad. I lived it. I was there. I lived through hell.
Right.
I saw the devil. I know what they look like, and they wear swastikas. Like, I would imagine I would be very vehement, but even now, like talking, it's like I was there. Of course I wasn't there,
right.
But I could see how that would be a very black and white issue. So how does someone find that level of forgiveness? And that's, again, a fascinating compassion, empathy, the light. I call it the light with a capital L. Where does that come from? Like, where do you find that within yourself, to offer that gift to someone that may or may not deserve it? And are we even the people who should offer that gift? Right. Or is it a selfish decision because I can live with myself if I offer forgiveness, but I would have a hard time with my conscience if I didn't. So again, it's muddled, and it's fascinating to me, obviously.
Yeah, right. And I can understand why too. It is something that I think it's a very personal response that creates the answer. And so that's hence why people don't agree with each other.
Exactly. But to your point, why not listen? You might learn something, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So powerful. We're getting close to finishing up, and I got to make sure that I say this because, you mentioned it at the beginning a little bit. Who is your target audience? Because, this read fine as, an adult reading this book. And I said, who's your target audience?
My books are primarily written for women of a certain sage. And I say that because it can be age or older, someone who is willing to learn something at any age. But what I'm finding with this particular book, I wrote it, and when I sent it to the publisher of Van Velzer Press, the editor was like, this is kind of a YA book, but it's not. And I was like, yeah, I know. And so it's a Bildungsroman book, which is a book specifically for people who are willing to learn a lesson at any age. So there's an actual genre, but it's not like you can go into the bookstore and be like, I'd like the Bildungsroman section, please. So because we need to categorize it for good reason, it's categorized as a YA book, but I'm finding really that teenagers, early 20s, and then people over 50, men and women, which again shocked me. I didn't think men would enjoy it as much as they do, but this is what I'm hearing from people who email. So I think that it's that age range, like 22 and 13 to 22. I had several 13-year-olds read it. Their parents approved. And then, because there are some yucky scenes. And then people over 50 who I think have lived long enough that they're starting to ask questions about, well, why am I here? And what do I stand for? And things like that when you're not so involved in raising kids anymore because, you know, they're off on their own, and you have a chance to look inward and think, what would I do? You know, I think a lot of people in the 22 to 50 range are still busy raising kids and do not want to read something that's going to require a lot of thought.
Oh, that makes sense.
That's not necessarily true, but often it's the case, because I hear, oh, I love trashy, you know, I love to sit on the beach, and I'm like, yeah, you don't want this book.
Well, as a note, I hadn't thought that it was YA until I read some of your reviews, and I went, oh yeah, I guess it could be YA.
Yeah.
I
didn't write it that way, and my publisher was great. She changed some of the verbiage. Gotcha. She younged it up, I put in quotations, to make it not so cerebral, I think. And in so doing, because the 15-year-old protagonist is such a strong character, in fact, I think it became YA. But the picture on the cover is based on a picture of Antonia Gentry, who is in Ginny and Georgia on Netflix, because I loved the show and I loved her character. And so when I was thinking about when I wrote Ebony, people have asked me, by the way, you know, I'm a 55-year-old white woman writing a 15-year-old biracial character. Who am I to be doing that? And my answer is this. Every character that I have written has come to me almost fully formed in my head. Wow. So there was never any question in my mind that Ebony was biracial. No question. Devil's Grace, 2 books ago, someone asked me if I would consider writing the main character as a person of color, and my immediate answer was no. And they said, why? And I said, because that's not how she came to me. So I did have some people of color read this book to make sure I was being as culturally sensitive as I can. So I hope I did okay. I have not heard otherwise, but I'm always open to comments.
Gotcha.
So.
Well, cool. Thanks for sharing that. And just like I said, though, it's for anyone who reads. I didn't even think about it being a YA book until I read some of the reviews, and I went, "Oh yeah, I guess you could say this." So cool. You know, just a note: you have some incredible reviews, and I'm gonna read one here on Amazon. A review titled "Heartwarming and Insightful" said this is a lovely story of friendships, strong women coming into one's own, and lessons learned. I love the intergenerational relationship between the 2 main characters and how they both benefited from their shared stories. The author brings them to life in a way that keeps you rooting for them despite their imperfections. There are unexpected twists, and present-day social issues are addressed in a thoughtful, intelligent way. Love this book and highly recommend it to teens as well as adults. This is cool. I mean, when you started writing, did you ever think about getting reviews like this?
No, I didn't think about getting reviews at all. Now, every once in a while, I check like once every 2 weeks to see if there are new reviews. And, you know, writers have different opinions on that. But I do like to check, because I do like to hear it. There's some people that have said to me, you know, I thought your other books were better. I wanted to hear more about the old woman. And it's interesting because, as I said, this story became about Ebony because Madam had retracted her permission to write about her. So right. This is a different book than my other ones. So it just depends on what you like. But yeah, I'm very pleased and grateful that there are some good reviews and that people are being very kind.
Well,
it's kind of a relief.
Nice. Just a note, I listen and read a lot of stuff, and I listen to podcasts and read all kinds of books, and it's just funny because I've heard a lot of authors say things like, I don't look at my reviews because especially if it's a 1-star, because then there's someone who probably shouldn't have been reading my book in the first place.
That is often true. Yeah.
And so I thought that was interesting. But very cool. And kudos on the reviews, because they're all over the place in different areas. What I mean is like in Amazon and good reviews and stuff like this. And I think that's cool too. So
thank you.
Kudos to you. That's very cool. So, all right. So we're tying this all up and bringing it to an end, and enjoyed your book, Beth. But if someone wanted to follow up and connect with you, learn more, where would you send them?
My website is the best way to get in touch with me. So ElizabethSplaineAuthor.com, all one word. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram and all of the social media channels. But that's probably, obviously, Facebook. That's the best way to get in touch with me. And I do love to hear from readers. Like I said, I will have a conversation with you if you love the book and if you didn't love the book. I want to understand why. So I love to chat with people. And I just drove last weekend. I drove 4.5 hours one way to attend a book club because they were reading my last book, Swan Song. So, you know, I'll travel because I love to chat with people and get the word out. So people can follow me that way. Yeah. And if they want to be added to my email list, there's no spam. And I send out 1 email a year. I would love to get Swan Song and Steel Butterflies into a school curriculum. One woman said to me, she's a former teacher, and she said, I feel like Steel Butterflies should be in a school curriculum because it deals with racism, ageism, all the isms that we that we need to tackle these days. Right. And that it's accessible to teenagers. So that would be really cool. But I'm doing a meet and greet at Brown University Bookstore over Parents Weekend, actually, in Providence. So that's going to be pretty fun too, because I get to interact with people who hopefully will be reading the book. So
nice. Well, have fun with that. That's very cool.
Thanks.
Beth, thanks so much for talking with me. I love historical fiction, especially when it's based upon real events and situations and people. Your characters deal with real issues from past and from today. Steel Butterflies is an excellent read, and there are lessons to be learned. Wishing you success in everything you do.
Thank you, my friend. It was great to see you.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching, Learning, Leading K-12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.